Hello, Hope Fellowship. This is the video for Thursday of Passion Week, and I hope that you've enjoyed these lessons in the life of Jesus, the week leading up to his crucifixion, and it certainly has been enjoyable for me. And today, on the Thursday of April 2nd, AD 33, this is Jesus' last night before his crucifixion, and he will observe the Last Supper, the Passover feast, and as well as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And doing that with his disciples, he'll also pray in the Garden of Gethsemane and be arrested. And so we want to deal with that. As we talked about, Jesus had been teaching all week in the temple, and the day before this, April 1st, April Fool's Day, Judas Iscariot became the ultimate April Fool by agreeing to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver whenever he could find the right opportunity. And so Jesus sent Peter and John to prepare the Passover meal for him so that he could eat it with his disciples. And there at the Last Supper, Jesus initiated the new covenant, replacing the old covenant of Mount Sinai. You know, at the institution of the Old Covenant, Moses and Aaron, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel had gone up to the top of Mount Sinai where they saw God, and they shared a meal together with him in Exodus 24. And so thus the Old Covenant was instituted at a meal between the Lord and the elders of Israel. And now in the upper room, the new covenant was instituted at a meal between the Lord and the elders or the disciples, the elders of the church. And so here at the Last Supper, when Jesus said, "This is my blood which seals the covenant," the words, except for that word my and my blood, were identical to the Greek Septuagint's translation of Moses' words at the institution of the Old Covenant in Exodus 24, verse 8. And so clearly, Jesus was instituting a new covenant to replace the Old Covenant. Now, I'm not going to take the time in this video to talk about all the parallels between the Seder meal and the gospel of Jesus Christ. But in the breaking of bread, Jesus identified his own body that would be broken for the people, and the poured out wine to be his own blood shed for them. And so the old meaning of the Passover celebration was this: the liberation from slavery through the death of the Passover lamb. And the new meaning through the new covenant was now the liberation from sin and death through the death of the Messiah. So we went from the liberation of slavery through the death of the Passover lamb to the liberation from sin and death through the death of the Messiah. Now, the covenants of the Bible were treaties between God and his people. And so it's really significant that Jesus said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood poured out for you." Literally, he was saying, this wine is the token of God's new covenant to save you, an agreement sealed with the blood I will pour out for you. And so since the time of Homer, the pouring out of a cup of wine was the normal way of sealing a treaty between nations. And so thus Jesus used this contemporary treaty symbolism to make sure that everyone understood that he was instituting a new covenant or a treaty with his people. And also during the meal, Jesus identified Judas Iscariot as the one who would betray him. It says in John 13, verse 27, "As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. 'What you are about to do, do quickly,' Jesus told him." And so Judas then leaves the upper room to go and find the chief priests and the soldiers to come and arrest Jesus. And so as soon as Judas leaves, Jesus says, "Now is when the Lord will be glorified in me and I in him." And, you know, since the old covenant contained commandments, one would expect that the new covenant would contain a new commandment. And so at the Lord's Supper, Jesus then says next, "Now I am giving you a new commandment." And this was the commandment: love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. This is John 13:34. This was the new commandment that Jesus gave as part of the new covenant, to love one another. As I have loved you, you should love each other. And then after Jesus identifies Simon Peter as the one who would deny him, they sing a final hymn. And we know that during this Passover meal, they would sing through Psalms 113 to 118. So likely it was Psalm 118 that they finished up with. And then he and his disciples crossed the Kidron Valley and went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And while they were traveling, walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, on the way, Jesus speaks to them very dearly, and he warns them of what is to come. And just like he had just said to Peter, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you. And after you have been restored, encourage your brothers. He gives Peter that personal encouragement, knowing what was about to happen in Peter's denying him 3 times before the rooster would crow the dawn of Friday morning. And so here he is speaking to all of his disciples very dearly, and he tries to prepare them for what's about to happen and when he's going to be taken away from him. And in John 16, verse 32, it says, "But a time is coming and has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home. You will leave me all alone. Yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." And when they get to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus asked the disciples to pray with him while he went to be alone to pray. But the disciples kept falling asleep. And in Luke it says that they were exhausted from sorrow. See, because they were really now just beginning to grasp what Jesus was saying, was that he was leaving, and that things were going to get bad, and that he was actually going to be dying for them. Jesus prays for many things, including asking that this cup of God's wrath be able to pass from him. And after his 3rd time coming back from praying, he woke the disciples. And at that moment, Judas came leading the Roman soldiers to come to arrest Jesus. And at this moment, we'll stop here, because the rest of this stuff actually takes place on Friday, because things continue on through the night from Jesus' arrest and his multiple trials. And so we'll cover that in our next video. But I just pray for each of us as we are now entering into this time where we're going to be celebrating Easter essentially off alone in our homes and scattered, just like the disciples were. And maybe this will be a time when we can gain a sense of appreciation of what it must have been to begin to hear the story that Jesus perhaps rose from the dead, and for them to be coming out of their isolation, to be discovering this news and to be questioning it and wondering if it was true and hoping about it. And so may God really prepare our hearts as we celebrate the death, the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection of our Savior Jesus Christ. We'll see you next time.